Hello, this is SR. Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. In previous years, wives sunbathed topless, but this year Jackie felt strange being the only wife here, so she left the top on. Manny and Trace were talking and drinking beer in the cockpit of the boat. They had been friends for more than 15 years, as college roommates, whose friendship was strengthened when they married girls who were also close friends. Trace was especially attentive when his friend's wife unbuttoned her top so that there was no white stripe on her tan back. Since Jackie was lying with her head towards the wheelhouse, he liked talking to her, because she had to lift her head slightly to answer, and usually she showed a little cleavage. Trace was already enjoying the ride. It was the beginning of September. They were making their annual voyage from North Carolina to the Bahamas, where they had to leave the boat for the winter. Usually there were 4 of them, but this year, due to work-related problems, Trace's wife, Donna, could not go. The others thought they should reschedule the trip, but Donna wouldn't hear of it. Donna teasingly asked Jackie to keep an eye on Trace. "Don't worry, I'll make sure he behaves well," Jackie said. The first day passed quite calmly. They spent the early morning getting ready and making final adjustments to the boat. Beaufort was abandoned around noon. It was a beautiful, unseasonably warm day. So Jackie put on a bikini and lay down on the deck to sunbathe a little. Around 4 in the evening, when the sun stopped giving off a tan, Jackie put on her top again and announced that she would be having dinner now. Manny teased her, saying that being the only wife on board, she had to do all the women's housework. She teased him back by hugging Trace and saying, "It sounds tempting. I might like some of my responsibilities." Manny laughed and answered quickly, "That's not what I meant." Jackie and Trace exclaimed in unison, "Damn it, what a pity." They were all very funny people. Despite the fact that before meeting their husbands, each of the women had several lovers, they were good and faithful wives. However, marriage did not prevent any of them from flirting. The 2 couples were so flirtatious with each other that it would be difficult for someone who didn't know them to determine who was married to whom. Teasing and flirting were very funny, but despite the fact that there was a lot of verbal banter, no one ever swung at the other's spouse, not even patted on the ass. Well, except for that stupid night when they went to bed with each other's partners for about 60 seconds, but even that was pretty innocent. The first evening on the yacht was quite calm. We ate, drank some wine and chatted a lot. They agreed on the time of duty and Trace suggested that they go to the bedroom, since he was alone anyway. Jackie and Manny went to bed around 10. It had already been a long day and Jackie was supposed to be on duty at 2 in the morning. She put on her usual pajamas, panties and blouse, while Manny put on boxers. They sat in each other's arms for a while, but got tired of all the running around of the previous days and fell asleep. Around 2 in the morning, Jackie woke up and went up on deck. The night ocean breeze was slightly cool, so Jackie put on pajama pants and a hoodie. Trace thought, no matter what she's wearing, she still looks beautiful. Jackie and Trace chatted for a while drinking the coffee she made for them. The conversation was mostly about what she should do during the watch, but she had pretty good memories from previous years and she knew everything that needed to be done. They had already crossed the Gulf Stream and turned south, so it was actually quite simple. Trace said all she really needed to do was keep an eye on the other boats and hold her course. He went downstairs to get some sleep on a folding bench. 4 hours later, around 6 in the morning, when the sun had already risen, Jackie relieved Manny and she went downstairs to get some sleep. There was no place to change in the forepeak, and Jackie was standing in the main cabin where Trace was sleeping, taking off her pajama bottoms and hoodie. She had panties under her pajama bottoms, but nothing under her hoodie. Trace had his back to her and didn't move. She pulled her blouse over her head and climbed onto the V-shaped bed. Trace heard her. He realized that she was changing clothes, wanted to turn around and look, but even in the dim light of the early morning it would be too obvious. All he could do was use his imagination. The heat of the day was growing in the cabin. Jackie and Trace woke up at about the same time. Around 10 in the morning, they chatted in the galley while Jackie made coffee and breakfast. They both joined Manny on deck for coffee and breakfast. They talked, but Trace found it hard to pay attention to anything other than Jackie's legs. However, Trace didn't really get enough sleep on the hard bench. Later that day, Jackie invited him to take a nap on the V-shaped bed. Trace stood at the helm while Manny and Jackie basked in the sun on the deck. Trace watched Jackie in an open-top bikini and recalled the second day of last year's trip. The women were basking in the sun on the deck of the boat. They stripped topless. He had hardened then by watching them, and he also hardened now by remembering it. There was a lot of whispering between the two women that time. Both were lying face down with their bras unbuttoned, but then they turned over without bothering to fasten them. He was at the helm. None of them looked in his direction, but they knew he was there. Manny was downstairs, but went up to the cabin right after it happened. She and Manny talked for quite a long time about how good their women looked. Trace listened as Manny told him how good Donna looked. This year, when the sun was setting, Jackie was playing the role of a wife, cooking and cleaning. After taking a short shower in turn, they had dinner together in the control room. Although it was a little small for the cool ocean breeze, Jackie was wearing pajama shorts, a tank top and no bra. She blushed at the attention, but called them perverts and changed the subject. Around 10 o'clock, Manny and Jackie went downstairs, leaving Trace on watch. Manny and Jackie climbed into bed and closed the bedroom door. In a way, it was sad, but after 10 years of marriage and 2 children, their bed life became more like speed dating than making love. Oh, sure, they made love, but mostly only on weekends. As they hugged each other before going to bed, Jackie whispered to her husband, "How about giving your wife a quick treat?" He smiled and said, "I'm always ready." "My God, you really know how to please me. Promise me that if you ever divorce me, we can still make love." Maybe it was a complex from her youth, but he was going to make her do it. Her knees were bent and her body was writhing. She could feel an incredible sensation building up between her legs. She pressed his head to her and whispered, "Please, baby, please." "What?" he teased. If Manny had continued his teasing, she would have exploded. A vibration emanated from inside her like an earthquake. She wrapped her legs around him, repeating his name over and over again. Manny lost control and couldn't hold back anymore. After everyone took a quick shower, they fell asleep in each other's arms. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the alarm clock rang. Manny was in a daze. He set the alarm to wake Jackie up for her scheduled shift, but she was still asleep. He decided to replace her at the helm and let her sleep until 6. I made coffee and went up on deck. Manny and Trace chatted until Trace was ready to get some sleep. Manny suggested that Trace would be better off sleeping on a V-shaped bed rather than on a wooden bench. Trace knew there was nothing wrong with being in bed with Jackie, at least as long as they were both dressed, but still, he was surprised by Manny's offer and politely said, "No, it's all right. The bench is not so bad." But Manny insisted, saying, "It's not right that you have to sleep on this bench. Besides, she's passed out. You won't be able to wake her up even if you try." Trace shrugged and went downstairs. He stood in the cabin, wondering what to do. He felt awkward. Manny was just being polite, not realizing that he shouldn't be so trusting. Trace wanted to be a good friend, but the thought of Jackie rolling over and hugging him in his sleep was more lustful than friendly. He remembered the short time he had spent in bed with her last year. In fact, nothing special, just drunkenly behaved stupidly. The wives had gone to bed a few minutes earlier while she and Manny were finishing their beer. The men, seemingly by accident, but actually intentionally, got confused about which beds they should sleep on. The wives giggled and played along, knowing that their husbands were just acting like jerks. Manny slid into bed with Donna, who was lying with her back to him, and shouted to Trace, "We must have got the beds mixed up. This woman doesn't look like Jackie." Donna pressed her butt against Manny and laughed. Trace escalated the situation slightly. Jackie had her back to him, but Trace hugged her. Jackie was a little surprised, since Trace had never touched her before, but it was actually nice. She laughed, turned slightly back and whispered, "You better watch it, or you'll get more than you can handle." Manny, not believing Trace, but also not wanting to be left behind, shouted, "I'm going to put my hand in her panties and see if she's shaved." Although he didn't actually make the slightest move to do so, Donna sat down and said, "Okay, the fun is over." Little boys need to be in their beds right now. The guys stood up laughing, and the fun ended. But it was a joke, and now it's for real. He had mixed feelings, but he decided he would do it anyway. He took off everything except his boxers and climbed into bed. The V-shaped bed was much more comfortable than the bench, but sleeping next to Jackie was very difficult. Trace tried to keep a respectful distance between them, but since their heads were facing towards the bow of the boat, there wasn't much space between the top of their bodies. While they were sleeping, Jackie moved a little and felt the warm body of the man she considered her husband. She moved a little closer. Trace fell asleep thinking about Jackie and dreamed about her. Jackie woke up that night. She was still sleepy, but she realized that Trace was next to her, not Manny. She wondered how and why he ended up in bed. Of course, Manny knew that he and Trace had been in bed together. She wondered what could have happened. She didn't want to wake Trace up. She liked the feeling, especially if her husband didn't mind. She fell asleep again without moving. Sometime later Trace woke up. He found Jackie snuggled up to him. He did not know that she was waking up and already knew who was in bed with her and tried to move away from her, but he was already pressed against the side of the boat and there was nowhere for him to move. He needed to move Jackie, but he didn't want her to wake up and find them like this. He was trying to think of something else. When the morning sun penetrated into the cabin around 6, they both woke up. They looked at each other and laughed nervously. None of them moved. Jackie didn't sound like she was objecting, but she demanded to know how Trace ended up in bed with her. He told me about Manny's offer. She told me how it happened. Trace reminded her of a brief moment last year when they'd been in bed for a minute or two. Jackie smiled at the memory. The situation this year was already pretty good, so Trace took it that he wouldn't normally take advantage of. Jackie closed her eyes, as did he. Their faces were close, and when their bodies reacted, they exchanged a kiss. At first it was an awkward, short kiss. She hurriedly put on a hoodie and went upstairs to see Manny. Trace couldn't get the scene out of his head. What if she hadn't stopped? Would he have stopped? He didn't believe he could do it. Jackie was probably talking to Manny about it right now, but how much had she told him? What was Manny really thinking when he asked Trace to lie down with Jackie? Of course, he knew she was naked. Did he experience them? Had the friendship just been destroyed? How was he even going to meet Manny face to face? He dozed off, and a million unanswered questions raced through his mind. Manny spent most of the watch thinking about Trace and Jackie in bed next to each other. It was his suggestion, and it was innocent. However, after he did that, he had other thoughts. He couldn't help but think about how much Jackie loved hugging and how she did it in her sleep. He began to imagine Jackie in panties and a little top, cuddling up to Trace. Then it dawned on him that he had left his wife naked. Oh, my God, he thought. He thought about it for a while and hoped that she was dressed this time. He quickly went downstairs, leaving the boat on autopilot, went to the door and saw his wife's body, mostly covered with a sheet, but pressed against the trace. Manny returned to the control room. He had some strange thoughts. First, there is the fear that when Jackie wakes up, she will be very angry with him, and this will ruin their trip. He was also a little jealous because Trace, although asleep, was enjoying his wife's body. What if they wake up? Can anything happen? Realizing that they were friends and that nothing would happen, Manny calmed down a little. He also thought about how beautiful it would be if he ended up in bed with Donna sleeping. To pass the time, Manny tried to think of something else, but it was difficult. Jackie walked over to the control room. She was not happy and bombarded Manny with questions, being clearly agitated. She demanded answers about what had happened, wanting to know why she was naked and in bed with Trace. Manny explained the circumstances and swore that he did not remember that she was naked. He said he felt uncomfortable with Trace sleeping on the bench and that since she was already asleep anyway, there shouldn't have been any harm from him sleeping on the V-shaped cot. Jackie wondered if he was telling the truth. She knew that Manny could be a little weird, and although he had never expressed any desire to open up their marriage, he liked her teasing and even the occasional outburst. She wondered if Manny was hoping that something might happen. she also thought that it could be a test. Manny knew she was always flirting with Trace, just like Donna was flirting with him. Maybe Manny was a little jealous of her and Trace and decided to check on her and see if anything would happen. Maybe he spent the night trying to catch them. It is more likely that he is telling the truth, but even that didn't get him off the hook. It was still quite annoying that he had decided that it was okay for her to share a bed with another man, as if she belonged to him. There was no way he should have made that decision. If she had been consulted, she might have agreed. But she put on some pajamas and tried not to snuggle up to him in her sleep. Jackie wasn't going to let her husband go so easily. She didn't break the dishes, but she would make him pay. I decided that I would be a little cold with him today, and in order to ensure that he thinks about his mistake all day, she will make him a little jealous. She decided that her actions that day would give the impression that she and Trace had at least shared a small moment. Manny was going to be tortured. This will be the last time he'll ever pull this off. Trace had no idea what he was getting into when he went up to the control room after sleeping. There was still a mess of thoughts in his head that came to him right after Jackie left him about 4 hours ago. But he put on his best face and greeted them both cordially as he left the cabin. Everything seemed to be in order. Manny handed him a cup of coffee from a freshly made pot. Trace felt some tension between Jackie and Manny, so he wanted to avoid asking about the sleep situation last night. However, Jackie wasn't going to give him any relief. As she passed him in the control room, she gently patted his chest with an open palm and playfully said, "Did you finally get some rest, honey?" This remark did not escape Manny's attention and was supposed to be the first of many. Jackie went down to the cabin to put on a swimsuit. It was their third day in the ocean. On average, they walked more than 150 miles a day. Tomorrow, if the weather remains favorable and with a little luck, they will arrive at Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas, where the boat will stay for the winter. Jackie returned to the deck, dressed in another of her mini bikinis. The lunch she brought with her was much more plentiful than her swimsuit. She brought a tray of toasted tortillas, topped with slices of ham and poached eggs. It was probably supposed to have a little hollandaise sauce on top of the eggs, but obviously the boat didn't have the ingredients needed for this. A can of V8 juice was served along with the coffee. Almost exquisite food. Not bad for a sailboat. After they ate, Jackie stretched out on the deck. After applying some light sunscreen, she slowly took off her top. Manny and Trace were watching, but they pretended not to. She slowly applied extra lotion and lay back, starting a conversation with Trace, continuing to treat her husband coldly. About 45 minutes later, Jackie rolled over on her stomach and called Trace. Trace felt like he was walking on eggshells. He could feel the tension between Jackie and Manny. Jackie asked him to put some lotion on her back, whereas in previous days she had always asked Manny to do it. Jackie, lying face down in her bottoms, was a very attractive sight. However, while watching Manny, he had to be very careful how he touched her. Trace applied the lotion dispassionately. Manny watched Trace's hands slide over Jackie's shoulders and back. He tried not to show jealousy or anger, knowing that if he did, Jackie might freak out. He wondered if she was faking it, or if she really wanted to get even, or if a night in bed had somehow changed everything. About an hour later, Jackie sat down and said she wanted to swim. She was still topless. Trace couldn't take his eyes off her and instead suggested that the boat could be followed by two at a time on a tow rope. It would still be fun and much better than stopping. Jackie said she wanted to try, and while continuing to settle scores with Manny, she asked Trace if he would accompany her. Trace felt awkward and offered to accompany her to Manny, while he himself would steer the boat. But Manny insisted that Trace go, and he would run the boat. Trace agreed and threw out the stern line. He and Manny lowered the sails a little, slowing the boat down to 2 or 3 knots while Jackie lowered the ladder at the stern. She didn't bother to put the top back on. Jackie, about to go, thought about Manny. Because of all the water play that could happen, he could get a little mad. She felt awkward about tormenting him, and decided that her topless swim with Trace would be enough to make them equal. Jackie and Trace climbed down from the back of the boat into the water. They reached the end of the line, about 6 meters behind the boat. At first they kept apart and got used to it. Jackie said it was like water skiing without skis. The boat was moving fast enough to be fun and a little difficult to hold on to. After a few minutes, they started playing a little bit. One was holding onto the tug and the other was holding onto it. Then the one who was holding onto the cable pretended that he was about to throw off the second one, leaving him without a tow. At first, Jackie held onto Trace. She was aggressive and wasn't going to slip off. Then they switched places. Manny looked at it in amazement. Their bodies were so close to each other. He could only see the upper part of their bodies, as everything else was hidden by the water. Manny began to feel something unusual. He didn't know if it was because he was watching his wife with Trace or because he was thinking how much fun he would have if Donna were here. Jackie held onto the cable and Trace hugged her. His swimming trunks were tight around his waist, but otherwise they were rather baggy. Jackie wasn't strong enough to push him away, but they both put on a good show. It looked like she was throwing him off and he was grabbing her again. Then he slid down as if he had fallen off and wrapped his arms around her waist. Remembering their brief moment in bed, Trace decided that the door was open for some playful contact. He pretended that water got into his eyes and he couldn't see anything. Manny, as before, was watching them. He could see Trace's body pressed against his wife's, and although they were mostly underwater, he could feel Trace's hands sometimes near Jackie. Manny wasn't angry. He loved watching his wife, and he kept thinking about how much fun he would have here with Donna. Then Jackie slid down the cable a little. Trace thought Jackie had let go of the tug. He let go of her and grabbed the tug with both hands. Jackie put her arm around Trace's waist. She smiled and said playfully, "If you are allowed to touch everything, then I can win this little game by applying pressure." He thought he would like to lose, but he laughed and said, "Okay. I give up. The game is over. You've won." She smiled triumphantly and said, "I thought that cold water should reduce these things." She let him go, and he blushed a little at her remark. They returned up the tow line. He was sure they were messing around a bit. He had this strange feeling in his lower abdomen, but he also felt a stirring in his own shorts. He couldn't help but wonder what was in the bed. As soon as everyone returned to the boat, Jackie said, "I need to take off this wetsuit." Of course, she was only wearing the bottom of her swimsuit, so she didn't have much to take off. Manny threw her a towel and said, "Go ahead." While Trace and Manny were pulling on the sails, Jackie wrapped a towel around herself and began to take off the bottom of her bikini. It was a neat trick to take off the bikini under the towel. Of course, the guys had a few short arm shots here and there. The men watched her every move. Jackie loved being the center of their attention. After the swimsuit disappeared, she sat down in the control room wearing only a towel. Throughout the day, they talked about nothing and everything except exactly how they slept last night, while Jackie continued to tease them with a towel. Moving along the bench, she teased the guys, from time to time giving them the opportunity to briefly glance between her legs. Several times she got up and turned her back to the cabin to rewind and tighten the towel. After bathing, she stopped being cold with Manny. She began to talk to him more, although she still did not show affection. She noticed that the bulges on their shorts increased as her audience became noticeably more appreciative. Fortunately, she finally announced that she was going downstairs to change her clothes and cook dinner. After dinner, the three of them sat in the control room again and talked. Manny still wanted to find out what had happened when Trace and Jackie were in bed together, but he didn't know how to ask. Eventually, the conversation turned to Trace's birthday, almost a year ago, right after their last cruise. Trace and Donna, who lived about 50 miles away, were visiting Jackie and Manny for the weekend. It was Trace's birthday, and they went to a restaurant for dinner. Everyone ordered a special dish for the evening, something like spaghetti with small shrimp and spicy brown sauce. There was something sensual about the food, or maybe it was the way they ate it. They took turns feeding each other, making a mess, sucking on pasta and shrimp with sauce dripping down their chins. When they finished eating, they weren't ready to go home. Manny suggested an exotic dance club where artists arrange private dances. Manny and Trace thought it was a great idea. The women didn't like her very much, but since Trace's birthday was, they agreed. On the way to the club, they talked about how they would celebrate Trace's birthday by giving him a couple of beautiful lap dances. They made fun of Trace about the fact that he needed to have iron underwear, so as not to tear his pants. It wasn't too late yet, and they took one of the best tables. In fact, it was more like a semicircular sofa with a small cocktail table in the center. They had a good view of the stage and the rest of the club. They were surprised to find that there were several other couples in the club. Everyone expected that there would be only men there. And lap dancing wasn't just for men. It seemed that a couple of men were buying lap dances for their spouses or girlfriends and not for themselves. The reason was pretty obvious. When female artists performed a lap dance for another woman, it was much more touching. Strippers sometimes buried their faces in the girl's crotch, which was actually hot if the girl was wearing a short skirt, lifted up the girl's top. The guys decided Trace wouldn't get lap dances. They wanted their wives to get them instead. The women were against it for most of the evening. But when the wine flowed and they saw 2 or 3 other women receive them, they began to think that it might be harmless. Donna and Jackie said they wouldn't let the dancers do all this to them, and then they laughed. After some teasing and even bribery, the deal was done. Donna and Jackie accept a lap dance in exchange for a big shopping trip the next day. The guys thought they got off cheap. They would pay almost anything for this experience. They chose a couple of artists who were as close as possible to the type of girl next door. They seemed friendly and not too intimidating. Jackie and Donna were sitting in the center of the couch, with Manny and Trace on either side of him. The music probably had nothing to do with it, but as soon as it started, the dancers pushed aside a small table and began dancing. The dancers rubbed their bodies against the women. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who was asked, Donna and Jackie were both wearing trousers, so their legs were not visible. The dancers buried their faces between the legs of the women. Even in trousers, it was erotic to see Jackie and Donna like that. Then the dancers put their mouths to their wives' ears. It looked like the women were moving their tongues slightly over the lobes of their ears. Maybe it was, but it was also some kind of female conspiracy. The dancers told the wives that they should relax and have fun. Putting on a good show for their husbands, then everyone would win. The dancers will get the best tips, and the wives will get their reward at home. The wives were told how to signal the dancers at any moment when they feel uncomfortable about what is happening. Donna and Jackie smiled. The dancers were right. This little show was a dream come true for Manny and Trace. The girls' only conspiracy made women feel more comfortable in this situation. They relaxed and got fully involved in the process. The dancer at Jackie's was running her hands all over her body. Jackie looked at Manny and said, "Why can't you touch me the same way?" Dancers touched women everywhere. Their hands were everywhere. The women said that this would not happen and believed in it. But in the heat of the moment, everything seemed normal. They were surprised to find that their bodies enjoyed the attention, even if it came from another woman. In particular, Jackie enjoyed it. She looked at the next table and noticed that 4 men were staring at her. Then the dancer Jackie tried to move on to the next level. It might have worked in a minute or two, but the movement was too sudden and Jackie wasn't quite ready for it. Donna's dancer tried to do the same to her, but the wives put an end to it. The men were somewhat disappointed, but the music ended anyway, and the dancers stood up. While Manny and Trace paid them off and Jackie and Donna straightened their clothes, the men at the next table applauded them in appreciation. Jackie later said she felt like a college student in the middle of spring break. Perhaps this explained her behavior as they passed a table with 4 men on their way out of the club. Jackie stopped and, with her most flirtatious smile, thanked them for their applause. All the guys said how wonderful she was and how lucky her husband was. One of the men said that he didn't really get a good look at everything because the dancer was always in the way. Without really thinking about it, Jackie, who was standing in the middle of the club, pulled off her top. She smiled and asked if that was better. The neighboring tables burst into cheers and whistles. Jackie lowered her top again and said goodnight. They drove home in silence. Manny's car was there, and he and Jackie were in the front, Trace and Donna in the back. The only sound was the rustle of clothes. When they got home, they hurriedly wished each other good night and went to their rooms. It took several hours before the desire that had been building all evening was finally satisfied. The three of them recalled that evening in the darkness of the boat's cabin, and yet there was no discussion of what happened or didn't happen when Trace slept with Jackie last night. It was about 10 o'clock, and Manny took Jackie downstairs, leaving Trace at the helm alone. He fantasized about Jackie's legs wrapping around his neck. Manny and Jackie went to sleep on the bed. She woke up with Trace, then flirted with him and did a little bit of it in the water. She was on fire. I climbed into Manny's bed and closed the door. Manny had seen her like this before. It was usually after a night out and a little drinking. Her desire to be used was not the same as her desire to make love. He recognized and enjoyed the difference, but he didn't really understand it. I asked her about it, but she just said she felt obscene. Manny suspected that on nights like this she didn't want to feel like a wife. She wanted to feel like a friend, or maybe even a girl who had been picked up in a bar. On such occasions, he wondered if she was also imagining that he was someone else, perhaps a memory of her bachelor days. No matter how hot some of those nights were during their marriage, they also bothered him. Instead of just leaving them to his imagination, he often read something in them and became unsure of himself. However, today was different. He kissed her sharply, pulling off her clothes in a hurry. She answered exactly the same way. She looked like an animal in heat. Manny felt her intense emotions. She whispered in his ear, "Don't take it out yet." Her tone became pleading. "Once is not enough today. Please don't come out yet." Manny wanted to satisfy his wife. Manny was amazed at how she behaved tonight. He asked her, out of jealousy or excitement, he didn't know why she was so happy tonight. She evaded his question by saying that it was just ocean air and wine. But Manny wasn't going to be satisfied with her answer and asked, "Are you sure it wasn't something else, like last night with Trace in bed or today in tow?" His question made Jackie feel a little uncomfortable. She didn't know what to say. But Manny's body was telling her what she needed to know. She whispered, "Is that what you think or what you want to believe?" It was Manny's turn to think about how he should respond. After a short silence, he finally managed to confess. "Maybe a little bit of both. I would never cheat on you, you know that, but I am also a human being." We woke up very close to each other. It was exciting. "Tell me what happened there." "Tell me what you mean by close and exciting," Manny asked, then returned to his task. Manny's tongue explored her insides. But the conversation was also exciting. Jackie was actually getting hot. But at the same time she was starting to be afraid. She whispered, "I don't want you to get mad." Nothing really happened, but we were terribly close. Manny said, "I'm not going to get mad. Just tell me." Well, we woke up and found ourselves facing each other. We talked for a while, but we didn't move. "I wanted to know how he got here and why you sent him to me." "You know what's going on with me," she said. "I probably used it as an excuse for my behavior." "What do you mean by your behavior?" Manny asked. "Well, I don't know." She looked at him and kissed him, "Probably to get back at you. Or at least that was my excuse." Jackie fell silent as she began to feel a little guilty. He assured her that he wanted to hear everything. That he doesn't blame her. She continued. "Well, we kissed a few times. It didn't last very long. Then I felt guilty and nervous. I got up, got dressed, and went to join you in the control room. That's all that happened." Manny was on fire, and so was she. She looked at him with complete desire. They hadn't slept for more than an hour when the alarm clock rang. He woke them both up, but the alarm was set on Jackie's watch for 2 in the morning. For a moment, she hoped that Manny would volunteer to go and replace Trace, but then she thought about the fact that he would go back to bed with her. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Manny didn't sleep much either and really wanted to stay in bed. However, he was ready to volunteer for the watch when Jackie jumped out of bed. She put on a hoodie and shorts. When Manny fell asleep again, she made coffee and went to the control room. For Jackie and Trace, the situation was awkward. They both knew that what happened in the V-shaped bed and on the tow rope was more than just a friendship. They exchanged glances with a tacit commitment to each other and to their spouses, saying it would never happen again. They talked about the stars, the weather, and the boat. Neither of them dared to talk about what had happened between them. A few minutes later, Trace left Jackie at the helm and went downstairs. Trace was emotionally torn. As he tried to fall asleep on the bench, he thought about the intimacy he had shared with Jackie. Trace didn't know that his best friend was really turned on when he was told about this meeting. For the next few hours, while Trace and Manny slept downstairs, Jackie stayed in the control room alone with her thoughts. She told Manny about everything she had done to Trace. If even just talking about it was so good for both of them, then it couldn't be wrong. She was thinking of obscene ways to explore this newfound adventure. I remembered the crazy things I said and the foolishness that happened that night at the strip club. A plan began to form in her mind. Manny entered the control room a little after 6. Jackie had managed to stay awake, imagining her plan. But now she was half asleep and barely noticed Manny's presence before stumbling down the ramp. She saw Trace on the bench, but she could only think about sleep and collapsed onto a V-shaped cot without undressing, where she instantly fell asleep. Around 10 in the morning, Trace was woken up by the sound of Jackie taking a shower. She came out in a hoodie and panties. Trace pretended to still be asleep while she worked in the galley, making coffee and warming cupcakes. He hadn't deceived her. Turning with the mugs, she asked Trace if he was ready for coffee. He blushed at being caught and admitted that it sounded good. Jackie grinned and turned away from him to pour coffee. While she was standing with her back to him, Trace got up from the bench and pulled on his shorts, trying his best to hide his erection. The two of them took the coffee and cupcakes upstairs to join Manny. It was almost an hour later when Jackie started her little game. The three of them drank coffee, ate cupcakes, and chatted for a while. Jackie was still wearing a hoodie and panties. She was brushing her freshly washed hair when she started talking about Trace's birthday last year. She reminded the others that Trace had never received the promised lap dance. Trace said watching Jackie and Donna lap dance was more fun than any lap dance he could have gotten. Jackie shook her head and said, "I'm willing to bet, I will dance a lap dance with you that you will never forget." He couldn't imagine how such a thing could happen, especially when Manny was watching. But he didn't say anything. He just sat there with his mouth open. Jackie added, "This is Manny's idea." This was news to Manny. Of course, he said Jackie was beautiful enough to work in a place like this. And yes, they joked about wives dancing with their husbands on there. The men stared in shock as Jackie took off her hoodie and stood in front of Trace. He looked nervously at Manny. But Manny was grinning from ear to ear. He quickly turned on the music on the CD player when Jackie started teasing him. He kept trying to grab one of them in his mouth, but it always seemed to move away in time. But she didn't know how soon she wanted it. She looked at Trace. He won't last long. She looked at Manny. He was like a kid in a candy store. In fact, there were no rules. There was only a tacit understanding that nothing would actually happen. For Jackie, it was like an electric current coursing through her body. Manny watched in amazement. He knew his wife well. He knew those sounds and the expression on her face. I understood that this would not end with a harmless lap dance. They clung tightly to each other. And this feeling gradually subsided. When Trace came to, Jackie looked at Manny. She wanted more. Manny has never seen his wife with another man. It was a hot new experience. He felt some twinges of jealousy. But there was no denying his elation. Jackie got up from Trace's lap and pulled Manny off the small upholstered couch. Manny didn't resist. He wanted her as much as she wanted him. He crashed into her again and again. She lifted her hips above the deck and moved towards his thrusts. His balls bumped against her as he entered her deeply. It wasn't making love. They didn't stop, just slowed down and continued with slower, more deliberate movements. They continued as if Trace wasn't there. But he was. He came back to life. He was standing next to them in his boxers. It was more exciting than anything he had ever seen in a movie. Jackie looked back, saw Trace watching them, and reached out to Trace. And when he came closer, Trace knelt on the deck next to Jackie's head. Manny watched and thought, "Oh my God. This is my beautiful wife. The mother of my children." The sight and the thought of it were too much for Manny. His head was thrown back, his eyes were closed. He was completely exhausted. His body went limp. Manny dragged his lifeless body away from his wife and lay on his back on the deck of the boat. "Oh my God!" Jackie screamed. "It's unbelievable. Please don't stop. Neither of you." Her back arched. They all lay in silence for a few minutes, quietly catching their breath. Everyone was alarmed. Maybe they've gone too far. Jackie put her head on Manny's shoulder and asked if he was okay. Manny hugged her and said, "It was the most exciting adventure of my life. It couldn't have been better." The three of them smiled at each other and enjoyed the glimpses of the incredible passion they had just exchanged. A few hours later, they entered the Abaco chain and headed for Marsh Harbor. They'll dock tonight and have dinner at a restaurant. Tomorrow, when the sun rises over the Atlantic, they will fly on a paddle jumper flight to the mainland and from their home to North Carolina. The adventure is over.